When Duncan notices Mrs. Lewis, his mother, approaching the hospital ward in chapter 1412, he becomes worried. Since he and Zachary have been dealing with a trending search, he has a feeling that her visit may not be good news. Zachary is greeted by Mrs. Lewis, who is aware of the hot topic from her look in his direction. She is staring at Zachary with suspicion, and he understands that she must have seen the exposé. Mrs. Lewis offers her support and says that her husband knows several good doctors who could be of service. Zachary reassures her that he and Serenity are both well and do not need any medical attention. He explains that they went to the hospital under the false impression that Serenity had gotten pregnant by accident, instead of the excuse made up by the reporters. Their disagreement was caused by divergent ambitions for starting a family. Zachary confirms what Mrs. Lewis already suspected when she accepts his explanation. Serenity and Zachary both seem to be in good health, and she thinks they won't have any problems. She also says that Serenity's aunt, Audrey Stone, would be most worried if there were any problems with Serenity's ability to conceive. Serenity respectfully moves aside as Zachary guides Mrs. Lewis into the ward to see Liberty. Liberty's pale face and hurt arm catch the attention of Mrs. Lewis, and she expresses worry for Liberty's welfare. She also observes Sonny, who is uninjured and secure. Mrs. Lewis asks about the health of both Liberty and Sonny after being moved by the bond between a mother and her child. Turning her attention away from Duncan, Mrs. Lewis goes to Serenity and recommends that she and Zachary take care of Liberty, freeing him from his responsibilities. She emphasizes her desire to bring Duncan home to recuperate because, in her opinion, he has already fulfilled his obligations as a friend. Duncan is uneasy because he knows what his mother is going to do. Serenity swiftly steps in, thanking Duncan for his help and telling Mrs. Lewis that they've tried to get him to sleep. She explains that Elisa and her aunt will be taking over for them in the afternoon. Once Liberty is released from the hospital, Serenity swears she will express her thanks to Duncan. Duncan receives a warm response from Mrs. Lewis, who urges them to encourage one another and praises Duncan for his integrity. But when she notices his exhaustion, she can't help but worry because she's a worried mother. Serenity's advice is accepted, and Mrs. Lewis chooses to bring Duncan home. Mrs. Lewis bids Serenity and Zachary goodbye and tells them to take care of themselves as the chapter comes to a close. While Duncan gets ready to go with his mother, we are left wondering how this separation will affect the dynamics between the characters and the events that are taking place.